Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation today. It's year 9 of the war and day 275 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor in our land. And traditionally, I want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war. Today we will discuss an important subject. Important not during the war, but always. We will be talking about the countering domestic and gender-based violence. We will have panel discussion with the subject 16 days against violence. I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Oksana Zholnovych, Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, Kateryna Pavlichenko, Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, Pavlo Zamostyan, UNFPA in Ukraine. Good morning. Pavlo Zamostyan, UNFPA. Olena, Vykhor, Office of the Human Rights Commissioner of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, and Maryna, Bardina, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Good morning, dear participants. Today we can witness the beginning of the Ukraine-wide action 16 days against violence. We know that the Istanbul Convention came into effect on November 1st. So, Ms. Oksana, can you please tell us what are the mechanisms that policy trends implemented by the policy to support this subject, to support the people, unfortunately, afflicted by crimes like those? Thank you for this opportunity, to raise this important subject. Actually, on my way here, I was thinking what should I start with, and I understand that generally the subject of violence is not comfortable neither in Ukraine nor throughout the world. It's not comfortable to talk about this, not in the society, not even those afflicted by the violence feel comfortable talking about that. They're not always ready to ask for help, and they don't even understand and know to the full extent what can they receive from the state as the support. There are still a lot of stereotypes, a lot of things like the thoughts and opinions, like if there is violence, the victim feels ashamed and guilty. So it's a complicated, a complex subject that should be constantly taken care of and constantly considered. Unfortunately, the full-scale invasion, even notwithstanding that we have less applications submitted during this period compared to the previous year, but we understand that there is not less violence, and the things causing the domestic aggression is the internal relocation, exhaustion, and aggression, and these are the subjects which cause violence, because everything that happens to us provokes actually the cases of such violence. That's why we all have to ponder over this issue in terms of support, in terms of prevention, in terms of additional actions, notwithstanding the fact that there are many other complex challenges. We still do not have to omit the subject of violence, because this is what we're fighting for, so that our state extends the helping hand to everybody who wants to feel protected, realized, and none of the difficulties that people face shouldn't have been omitted in none of the phases. And in this aspect, the ratification of the Istanbul Convention is a very big step forward, because it helps us implement new steps to decrease the level of violence in our state, to have us counter the violence in a more efficient manner, and implement individual case-to-case approach, and to offer social help to the people. In September, we had a big audition in our ministry as to the quality, amount, and the sufficiency of social services provided to those afflicted by the violence, because we understand that the victims of domestic violence, they need help, not only financial aid, not like one-off aid, but something that can help those people stand on their feet, to get rid of the violence factors. And because there is financial dependency, emotional dependency, and other kinds of dependency. And I have to say that we made this huge step forward in countering violence. We have more than 600 institutions that provide different types of help. However, it's still not efficient. There are shelters, and in 2023, the local governments did not allocate funding for building of such institutions, but we have we have planned, but if there is no funding to implement this plan, it's nothing. So we will work with the local governments to implement the further steps. Secondly, we've seen that the most number of services were provided by the mobile brigades, but the government spent less funds on them than on other types of help, like consultations, shelters, and so on. So this is why we will allocate our next subvention that we were able to add to the budget 2023 for the services that are mostly demanded, but we need standardization, we need formalization in these terms. We have to have the algorithm of actions briefed to all the employees, because it's not only the people who counter the domestic violence, and it's not something that may be in their focus. And I see it as the challenge that we are ready to fight with within 2023, so that we implement more legislative initiatives to support the people afflicted by the domestic violence. And as a ministry, we are ready to take responsibility and leading role, and to engage to broader extent, so that the cases of violence become less and less in future. Ms. Kateryna, the National Police and Ministry of Internal Affairs is probably the body that works directly with cases like that to document crimes of this kind. What's the situation? How did it change during the war? We've heard that there is a decrease in the number of violence cases, but don't you think that the war may become a trigger for such problem, and the number of cases may grow in future? What are the changes, and how the structure of the crimes change? Well, in fact, yes, you are absolutely right. We will have the consequences for years to come during the post-war period. But generally, I would say that, first of all, war brought a lot of violence to Ukrainians. And in conditions like these, we don't have to tolerate domestic violence in no case. We don't have to keep it under wraps. War is not the reason not to talk about domestic violence. Today we start the action 16 days against violence, against gender-based violence, domestic violence, and we, within all these 16 days, we will be talking about the fact that violence should not be kept silent, that people should ask for help, come to police, to social services, to receive necessary help, and to break the vicious cycle of violence. Talking about statistics, indeed, comparing to the last year, the number of cases fell 24% in terms of application to police. But at the same time, we have to understand the reason for that. First of all, a large part of the territory is under occupation or was under occupation. People could not report the cases of violence, and police was unable to document them respectively. Besides, many Ukrainians now are internal refugees, Some of them went abroad, their families got separated. It's another specifics, but it's one of the reasons as well. For example, in western parts of Ukraine, where most of the internal refugees are relocated, there, for example, the reporting about violence even grew a little bit compared to the previous years. So we have to apply a differentiated approach, and we have to understand the statistics is somewhat different. So this is probably the answer to your question. Mr. Pavlo, as a representative of international organization, what are the projects you are going to support, and what are the problems you're facing in our system? Good morning, dear friends. I have to say that UNFPA, in UNFPA we work globally on the subject of violence, and we have to bring it to 0 by 2030. And Ukraine, before the full-scale invasion, was at the very steady, on its steady way to this goal. The essence of it was probably the ratification of the Istanbul Convention during the war by the Parliament of Ukraine, but before that there was a network of services created, and some fundamental and cardinal changes took place in police in terms of their reaction to cases like those. Some cities can be called champions, like Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, or Mykolaiv. The allocated subvention which the communities used played its important role. For example, in Kropivnitsky, within 1 year, they managed to implement the local municipal system, which is about to start operating, which includes day center and shelter, and it will receive further funding. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we understood that we have to focus on a number of things. First of all, to make sure that what has already been done would not disappear. We had to maintain this system. So we came back to funding of the mobile teams which work in Ukraine. It's 101 teams throughout the whole of Ukraine. We'll extend this practice in the deoccupied territories shortly. In Kharkiv and Kherson region, more than 30,000 people already used the service like that from the beginning of the year, and we have crisis rooms, shelters, day centers, and but we still have to finish what was not finished before the war in terms of co-funding and to solve the issues that Miss Irina was talking about. And there is a problem of sexual violence related to the war. It's a new challenge for the society, and we have to create the opportunities for those afflicted by this problem to have them understand what kind of help they can receive. And we're talking here about the opening of the centers, of the help centers, support centers. It's initiated by the Office of the Vice Prime Minister for European and North Atlantic integration. More than 24,000 customers already applied to these centers. There is an online platform where applicants can receive psychological help, not like one-off session, but a steady support by the psychotherapists. It's not like simple psychologists, but highly qualified psychotherapists. So we reverted to the strategy of health, we launched the clinical mobile brigades in for maternity homes, which received 30 wagons for operation of such mobile teams, and the mobile teams with for psychological help, I hope will receive their vehicles soon. We are in process of procuring the vehicles for them. Today we offer to have this action under the slogan "Sensitivity takes over violence." We had a research conducted in 30 cities, and it proved that only 2 persons out of 30 are ready to react to the violence that they see by their side towards men or women, or even to a family member, to report the case to the police, or say if something happens in the street or in their home. It's a very low number, and as a result we will only be able to be victorious over violence if we are sensitive to this issue and war, which in fact is violence. It normalizes the violence in our perception. It normalizes this phenomena. If we want not to let it happen among us, among Ukrainians, and this is why we call today, in the beginning of these 16 days without violence in Ukraine, let's be sensitive to this phenomena. Let's not normalize this phenomena, so we could both win the war and win over the violence. Miss Olena, we understand that many Ukrainians come to your center asking for solutions to their problems. What are the problems? What do Ukrainians come to you with? Good morning. Well, generally talking in figures and statistics, in the number of for the Human Rights Commissioner of Ukraine, as of today, we published 36,000 applications, and preparing to today's date, you see I'm dressed in orange. It's a symbol. It's the color against violence. And actually, when we analyzed the applications, the reports on domestic violence, there were 116 such reports, and we've seen the tendency that these reports, the number of these reports decreased compared to the previous year, during which such number was 180, and we understand that the subject of full-scale invasion moved the issue of domestic violence to the background, so to say. But it's still important because we drew the parallels, because all the preventive measures that we were taking previously, they already brought their results. A lot of work was done by the Ministry of Social Policy and the Ministry of Internal Affairs, by all the partners and national service, even in terms of training and study, and the subjects knew what they had to do in such cases. And the applications to the Office of Commissioner for Human Rights, it showed the underperformance of those mentioned bodies. But what about the other levers of influence? Say, for example, with the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, we may hold visits, monitoring visits. For example, last year it was only 43 such visits. Now, this year it was 150, which means that the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner focused on supporting the afflicted persons in terms of their access to the high-quality services, to the access to information, and etc. And regarding the reports we get at the Secretariat directly, Now we have a lot of applications for support in search for children. I know that a lot of people see us on YouTube. I want to say that you can report to the hotline, and those are the questions that you can ask in this customer support center. And with the help of such applications, we were already able to find more than 12,000 children like this. So the parents who lost their kids, they may call to our support center, and me and my colleagues, we will work in that direction. The Office for Commissioner of Human Rights, even before the ratification of the Istanbul Convention, had the initiative, and here all those present here work actively in this area. Now that Istanbul Convention is ratified, still we have a lot of issues with provision of services to the persons afflicted by violence. Ms. Maryna, there is a question to you. We know that Istanbul Convention came into effect so that the average Ukrainian understands. Can you please tell us what it will give them? Good morning, everybody. I adhere to the opinion that national legislation on prevention of domestic violence is at good level already, and there is not so much to amend it with, not so much significant steps to be still taken. It's the cooperation with courts, police, parliament, who understand practically what works already and what is still about to be done. So it's good that such cooperation is already in place. And I think that these documents, which seemed impossible due to a number of reasons before ratification, I'm happy that it became a law, and it's good that we ratified the Istanbul Convention. It's about the better protection guarantees. It's about closer attention by the law enforcement agencies, not about their reaction, but also about our citizens, so they understand what is home violence, so they recognize what is home violence. Because I was thinking previously that home violence is just like threats or a man beating his wife, and I have memories of what home violence is. My neighbors were like that, and it's terrible when people when children get educated in conditions like that. But we have to provide education on communication between the people, between partners in the families. This is why it's very important to recognize that the domestic violence is not only about physical violence, but also about emotional, sexual violence, economic violence, and so that every citizen restricts themselves in different expressions of violence, because it actually may happen in any family, and it's just not always that the family evaluates themselves and understands that this is violence, what's happening. So we have to do our work publicly. The law enforcement system reacts in a more professional way to the cases of domestic violence compared to the situation, say, 10 years ago, when we were not talking about this issue at all, because everybody was ashamed, everybody was looking at their neighbors, what they will think about this. So nobody was discussing these cases of domestic violence. Unfortunately, today, our biggest challenge is war, the full-scale invasion, because all the aggression and violence felt by Ukrainians from the end of Russian Federation, it will translate into different consequences. We were talking about the work of psychologists, psychiatrists. So all of us, we already bear some psychological imprint of the war, and we have to work with this imprint psychologically. And for example, the sexual violence against our citizens committed by the Russians, it's our common responsibility. both citizens and the states. We have to repel it and we have to react. So we work on the legislation to support the people afflicted by violence, not to let them alone on their own, so that the people are not left alone with their experiences. We have to support them, and this is the moment we're all going through now. No matter if we became direct or indirect victims of such cases, but in one way or another, we are all afflicted by this war. And in fact, I am very happy, not happy with the fact of war, but I'm happy that our state can keep going, can keep working in the direction of countering the violence when different branches of the government cooperate closely to counter these challenges. Ms. Kateryna, we started talking about the statistics of the Human Rights Commissioner Office. The statistics in your organization, we would like to hear during this period of full-scale invasion, how many cases do we have documented, how many crimes? How many reports did you get? How many reports from applications from the children? And who was punished? What's with the perpetrators? I would like to focus my attention on the fact that all the law enforcement agencies are now aimed at documenting the crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine. I mean, war crimes. It's more than 40,000 such crimes were already documented by law enforcement agencies. Talking about these crimes and violence in general, violence against women, gender-based violence, we cannot omit the subject of sexual violence under conditions of war. Ms. Maryna started talking about that already. So those crimes are maximally latent. People are reluctant to talk about them. However, the law enforcement bodies, they gather the evidences of such crimes and they document them. It's not so much of them, and we understand that it's on the top of the iceberg. It's only a fraction, and we will hardly manage to understand the number of the crimes like this committed during this full-scale invasion. However, even today already, 42 criminal cases are opened by the investigators of the National Police of Ukraine, and these cases are being filed by the Security Service of Ukraine as well. I know that 42 cases doesn't necessarily mean the number of victims or perpetrators or number of the facts, but those are the criminal cases, which may include several situations, several facts, several victims. I know that they include more than 100 facts already corroborated within those cases throughout Ukraine by all the law enforcement agencies combined. But talking about domestic violence, we really see that in total statistics is less. In the beginning of the war, there were even less cases, less reports to the police about the domestic violence, but the numbers started growing later. And this is what's different between Ukrainians and Russians, that we do not tolerate violence. If there is violence, we talk about it and we report it. So from the beginning of the year, we had more than 202,000 reports related to domestic violence. Well, it's really 24% less than the previous year, because within the first 10 months of the year 2021, we had 267,000 reports. But we have to understand that part of the territory was under occupation, part of the territory is still occupied, and our So our statistics as of now is like this. Dear colleagues, your questions, please. Good morning, Ukrinform. I have a question to Ms. Pavlichenko. Can you please inform how many police mobile teams work in Ukraine and in which regions? Yes, the mobile teams, Polina, are the mobile groups to counter and to react to the cases of domestic violence. They work everywhere where this program was launched before the war, except for the territories which are still under occupation. Besides, we also involve the police officers from these groups to identify to detect and identify the cases of sexual violence, and those servicemen were involved in documenting the effects of sexual violence during the war. Apart from the teams themselves, there are specialized sectors for domestic violence. And talking about the mobile teams you're asking about, it's around 50 of them working all across Ukraine. But again, part of the territory is occupied, and respectively, police is not being engaged in any activities there. Thank you. Vitaly Kolot, Ukrinform. I have a question to Ms. Olena and Ms. Kateryna. A recent case in Zaporizhia, there was a piece of news. A famous volunteer Valeria Ovcharova from Zaporizhia said that her kid was kidnapped and deported to Russia on 16th of September. She received the response from police that physically the child is in Kharkiv with their father, and then crossed the border with Poland and ended up in Russia. That's the report they received from the border service of Ukraine. And the question is, what are the chances to bring the child back? And the question to Ms. Kateryna is that the volunteer suspects that the police is in cahoots with the father. Could it happen that really physically the police officers could not physically track the absence of the child? Or can the police officers, for example, double check not only physically but by telephone, for example, and maybe circumvent it in that way? If you've seen a post like that on the social network, you could also see my post. It was yesterday around 9 or 10 in the evening. I contacted directly the woman who reported this issue, and the office of the commissioner works with this case directly. And availing myself of opportunity, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the office also actively monitors all the mass media and any information with regard to the violation of human rights, including child's rights, including deportation. We start working with this issue immediately. We send the information to National Information Bureau, to Security Service of Ukraine, to Ministry of Internal Affairs to consolidate our efforts. And then I have contact details of the mother to find out the details, and every child being returned. Well, I'm not talking about the cases in general, but some single case, maybe a big operation which involves civil sector and international partners. I will not dive deeply in detail, but we've seen the tendency that the more attention is drawn to those who are imprisoned and or children which were kidnapped, it increases so to say, the price for this person. And the parents, they have to understand that if there is a report to the government agencies, we know about this case and we keep in touch. We work with that. Ms. Kateryna, regarding the situation you just mentioned, you just asked, I want to convince you that every time a child crosses the border, the state border guard checks the documents, whom the child is living with and what are the grounds for living. I think that situation was checked at the border, and there were grounds, there were reasons, justification to leave. I don't think that we can talk about kidnapping here. So if the child is with their father, who is not deprived of the parent rights, so that the father has the rights to stay with their child. And yes, it's not the single case when one of the parents reports about the other one or other member of the family took the child and disappeared in the unknown direction. The police takes all the necessary steps to find out the location of the child, the condition of the child, whom the child is with, and based on what documents they were able to leave the country. The case is being investigated in detail currently, as Ms. Olena said, and in contact with the applicant, we will take further actions for returning of the child. Dear friends, it's been 2 weeks that our armed forces liberated our Kherson and part of the Kherson region. We understand that in part in the region and in the city there is already cell communication reestablished. Do you start getting reports or applications from the citizens there, from those who are back to the territory under control of Ukrainian governments? Do we receive any signals about violence, about children being kidnapped in those areas? Every time when our armed forces liberate certain territories which were under occupation, the first ones who enters those territories are the rescuers, the representatives of the State Emergency Service and National Police. The rescuers, they do the humanitarian demining of the traces left by the occupiers. The police officers document the crimes committed in those territories. Now we actively work in those territories. The crimes are being documented, the information is being gathered, all the necessary details, and also a specialized police team for identification of sexual crimes already started their operation there. So the work is going on in that area. And first of all, what this work is aimed at is at communication, at support of the population in those areas, complex help to them, complex support, because what people need first of all is when our officers come there, they deploy Starlink, people need communication, they start calling their relatives to report that they're all right. So it's important to have in those territories, to have the combined works of all the agencies so people get all the necessary support after that period of occupation they were in. And now this cooperation, this teamwork between the state agencies of Ukraine, it's pretty powerful now, it's pretty intense, and we work in quite a coordinated way. I would like to add that even when Kherson was in occupation, the heroism of our employees, it was demonstrated during the cases when we, for example, as the representatives of the Office for Human Rights, Commissioner for Human Rights, we were getting reports. For example, tomorrow morning the evacuation of children is planned. I want to focus your attention on children's school in Oleshki. They had a profile 304, and when we got the order on the appointment of the new director of school, in specialized school in Oleshki, it was an order with on the Russian letterhead with Russian coat of arms. So the employees of that specialized school, they shared this information, even notwithstanding the risks they were facing. And we know that after that their apartments were searched, their houses were searched. They did not set up, we did not hear from them for a couple of days, but we were getting very up-to-date information from them. And the cynicism of Russians, that Maria Lvova-Belova, their commissioner for children's rights, in their orders regarding the specialized school in Oleshki, it was clearly stated in that order that the children are about to be deported for recreation to psychiatric facility. And from the photos posted, from the pictures posted, we've seen that there were we've seen children on the stretchers where they were lying in couples in very difficult conditions. So no one was adhering to any standards, to any norms. The conditions the children ended up in were terrible. So I bow in front of the employees of that specialized school. It was really heroic. And to summarize it, I would say that yes, we can corroborate the cases of deportation of the children from the institutions, so the specialized service, and in the ministry we were in touch with the people from those specialized institutions. I can say, I don't want to disclose a lot of details, but I have to say that we work with the Office of the Prosecutor General to find the ways to return our children back to Ukraine and to corroborate the facts of crimes. We know already about the facts of deportation, and as Ms. Kateryna mentioned, the first ones who enter the occupied territories are the representatives of national police. So upon demanding, after we can resume the operation of all the social services, we call the representatives of all the local governments to resume the operation of the service for human rights, because we understand that there are orphaned kids whose parents were kidnapped or whose parents died, and the children may end up without proper care by the adults. And we developed special algorithm of how to resume the operation of the service for children's rights, because we understand that the specialists who were working there before in those territories, many of them left, many of them cannot fulfill their duties to a number of reasons. So there is a staffing issue. So we're working on the issue of refilling the staff, replenishment of personnel. We provide special trainings for such people of how they should act in conditions like that to start the full-fledged protection of the children in the deoccupied territories. And just for information purposes as to the work of the mobile teams, there are not only brigades who submit to the police. We have 516 mobile teams for socio-psychological help. It's not a small number. They work all across Ukraine, and people can get help calling to 1547 hotline. It's a national line. Also, you can call at at the hotline 0800 213 103. It's both for children and adults, where they can get any psychological help. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions to our speakers? I think no more questions in the studio. I want to thank our speakers for this important conversation. Dear colleagues, thank you for your interest in this subject. Let's trust in our armed forces, work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.